I'm sure we can all agree, Kushina's final decision to leave Naruto to Hiruzen is probably one of the worst things she ever did in her entire life. I mean, Naruto grew up with ramen, being hated by the village, and honestly, almost fell to the darkness if it hadn't been for Iruka's sacrifice on the day that Mizuki tricked them. So with this in mind, and with the fact that a lot of people have been doing Naruto Raised series, I decided, you know what? Let me hop on and let me do What If Naruto Was Raised by Jiraiya. This is going to be a short, sweet, and simple summarization of what I believe would have happened, so if you go on to enjoy the video in any way, shape, or form, make sure to smash that like button, and also, let me know what you think personally would have happened to Naruto had he been raised by Jiraiya down below in the comments. I'll definitely be making sure to read all the comments for the next 10 hours, say, so if you comment within that time zone, then I'll definitely make sure to get back to you. That said, let's get started.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
For this story to work out, we have to go off the assumption that Jiraiya, upon hearing of the destruction of the village, decides that he's going to go back to Konoha to see how everything is, check up on Hiruzen, and check up on his godson Naruto. So we start the story about 2 weeks after the Kyuubi attack. Alright, so let's just say that, Jiraiya gets to the village, he ends up talking to Hiruzen, and he ends up essentially meeting his godson as a baby. Baby Naruto would be put in the situation of just, crying in his cradle and such, and eventually Hiruzen would explain to him that he's going to be putting Naruto in a foster home. Jiraiya, upon hearing this, would be like, "You're gonna put the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails in a foster home. Why don't you raise him yourself, Hiruzen? I mean, I get you're a Kage, but why don't you simply use a shadow clone to fulfill your Kage duties?" Hiruzen hearing this would be like, "I could have done that this whole time." And Jiraiya would be like, "You are one dumb old man," before Hiruzen tells him to quiet down, to, remember his place. Jiraiya would say, yeah, and eventually he would just look towards the baby Naruto, who would smile upon the first, view of Jiraiya. He would end up looking towards the direction of Hiruzen before thinking to himself that Minato and Kushina probably would have wanted him to adopt him if he had, if he was around. Jiraiya would get these thoughts out of his mind before thinking to himself, no, I can't do that. I mean, the kid is a baby. It's going to interfere with my spy network too much. I couldn't possibly do that to my work. But just watching Naruto be happy as always would make Jiraiya double think this, eventually opting to actually take the young Naruto with him and raise him on his own. For the first couple of months, Jiraiya would end up actually having to stop his spy network in total, just due to the fact that Naruto being an infant wasn't exactly going to be the best thing for him. So he stopped for actually not months, but more like a week, before then deciding that, yeah, raising a literal baby from the start is not for him. He decides he'll come back for him once he's about 2 years old, and so Jiraiya would do so, coming back for Naruto when he's at the ripe age of 2. Actually, let's throw him a bone and say he's 3 years old. Naruto still hasn't experienced any hatred from many of the villagers due to them not knowing of Naruto's situation, and so when Jiraiya comes to adopt him and takes him with his journey, he ends up kind of being a father figure to Naruto, with Naruto being extremely happy at this, because this time he grows up with a lot of Jiraiya's personality rubbing off on him, as well as a lot of strength, seeing as this time Naruto's gonna have Jiraiya's mastery of chakra and all this stuff to actually teach Naruto and mold him into a splendid shinobi. Naruto would grow up being aware of many things, such as who his parents were, his heritage, him being a Namikaze as well as Uzumaki, and he would also be aware of how powerful his father was. Knowing of the many things that his father accomplished during the Third Great Shinobi War, Naruto would strive to be more powerful than his father and to actually be recognized in the village. Danzo never exactly had a reason to be like, Naruto's the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, since he's not in the village presently, and so eventually Naruto being with Jiraiya would lead him to kind of make Jiraiya believe that he's going soft. So he would eventually end up training a lot harder, and by the time that he takes this decision, they would actively both have grown a lot in terms of their relationship and the years that they've spent together. Naruto would already be 11 years old and would almost be ready to return back to the village in 1 year's time. And so Jiraiya just decides that he'll be taking Naruto along to Mount Miyaboku, thinking to himself that Naruto will simply watch as Jiraiya continues and completes his training. But what ends up actually shocking him is Naruto decides to take the time out of his day to sit down and actively try to learn these things. Naruto at this present time already has a full mastery of wind nature, water style, and also earth style. These are the things that Naruto has a very good mastery over. Fire style, he has a basic understanding, and when it comes to lightning, he hasn't quite jumped into that territory quite yet. But overall, Naruto's taijutsu and also a lot of his fundamentals as like in terms of being a ninja and like body flickering and substitution jutsus and things like that, they're essentially overpowered off rip. And so it's kind of a good thing. That said, as I said, remember that I said that Naruto went with Jiraiya to Mount Miyaboku. This has genuine big implications due to the fact that Naruto watching Jiraiya train would actually actively ask to train on his own. After about a week of pestering them, they would eventually decide to let Naruto do so. And after about 5 months of training with the Toads constantly, just like Jiraiya did when he was a couple years older, Jiraiya sees like a little bit of himself be inside of Naruto, so he opts to actually let Naruto remain in Mount Miyaboku, coming back for him in about 6 months, which he does, and Naruto would have actively mastered the Sage Mode training, also learning about Senjutsu and stuff like that, and creating a scroll with the Toads, so that he's now a Toad Sage. Jiraiya would be extremely proud of his, his prodigy, his successor thingy, his godson, and would be just happy for him in general. About a couple of months now, he's actually going to be having to return to the village, and Jiraiya, noting that there's not really too many things he could probably teach him in this much time, he continues to simply focus on Naruto's fundamentals and also having Naruto get better at activating Sage Mode than what he is currently, because it takes him quite a bit to activate it. He still is a kid. That said though, Naruto would have actually ended up getting over the fact that the Kurama is messing with his chakra because of the fact that he had Jiraiya there with him. That's why Naruto didn't exactly master all 5, because the first couple of years were spent on trying to get over that speed hump. But eventually, Naruto would end up going back to the village with Jiraiya entrusting him with 2 scrolls with techniques that Naruto needs to learn. Number 1 would be Seals and Space-Time Ninjutsu, with the second being the Rasengan, opting to tell Naruto to very much learn the first scroll first. So for the next couple of weeks that Naruto would be in the village, he would be trying his absolute hardest to learn this, using the multi-shadow clone jutsu to actively take advantage of said fact, and trying his very hardest to master the sealing process, getting past the first slump, which is learning the basics. Now he's trying to learn more like moderate levels of space-time ninjutsu and seals, and that's just essentially what Naruto's doing. By this time though, he would have already introduced himself to the class, and one notable thing that would change is Naruto isn't actively being hated by everybody. Naruto actually rocks the Minato hairstyle, and a bunch of people have made the connection that Naruto looks a lot like Minato, due to the fact that his hair is almost cut the same way, Naruto has the same blue eyes that just terrified nations, and Naruto all in all is very powerful, that shinobi in terms of how powerful he is, because as soon as they came to the scene, he showed very quickly he's far superior to that of Sasuke. Far superior, even though he was the rookie of the year. Eventually though, the teams would be assigned and Mizuki would still end up being captured. Not by Naruto this time, because he doesn't fail and he doesn't have some vendetta against him about being the Nine Tails. It's presently, nobody in the village is actually aware of said fact. So Naruto just gets to actively be happy. The only person that knows about this is Naruto, Hiruzen, and that's it. Danzo maybe, but he's not exactly just going to go throwing it out quite yet. That said though, what I believe ends up happening from here is essentially Naruto ends up just kind of integrating himself into the team of Team 7. We have the first day of interactions, and Kakashi, seeing the team dynamic, would end up establishing, okay, Sakura is a fangirl, Sasuke is an emo with a revenge and god complex, and Naruto is the strongest in the class, noting that he was raised by Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin, which is a very, very, thing that he's definitely going to be looking into. That said, though, when he ends up telling the team that they're going to be meeting him the next day without eating in the very early morning, the team would do so. Naruto wouldn't eat, just like expected, and eventually they would end up being told by Kakashi to rush at him with full intent to kill. As soon as this happens, Naruto would decide that he's going to be trying his best, not revealing his trump card quite yet, seeing as he wants to show that off in a later event. So what would end up essentially happening is Naruto goes on to, well, how do I put this? Just rush in at Kakashi and begin using a flurry of taijutsu attacks, shadow clones, substitution jutsu, and flash steps to just completely and utterly shock Kakashi, who at this point did not expect this kind of strength to be displayed from a genin. He would have then jumped off of one of his kicks and shot a powerful stream of water from his mouth that would have shocked Kakashi if it would have hit him, which he wasn't hit because he used the substitution jutsu. He rushed in and threw a flurry of kicks and punches at Naruto's direction, as well as flinging out a kunai, which Naruto promptly dodged and actually countered with one itself. He then proceeded to just begin to fight Kakashi with more even ground, and Kakashi began using jutsus against Naruto, which actually were dodged with the substitution and transformation jutsu, which Naruto was actually actively use to transform himself into metal objects, or like say like a ball out of nowhere. Like he'll actively use the transformation jutsu to turn himself into things that would actually help him in a battle. He also hardens his fist with the transformation jutsu, opting to turn his body to iron, kind of like hockey from One Piece, but not exactly the same. But he would rush in and his blows would deal far more damage because, you know, his hands, they're very hard. Pause. That said, though, what ends up essentially happening from here is Naruto would still end up getting outclassed with Kakashi. Like, yeah, I get it, Naruto is quite powerful and Kakashi didn't quite have to use his Sharingan, but Kakashi was able to outsmart Naruto, not outstrength or speed him, which he probably would do too, but he wasn't exactly going all out with his Sharingan quite yet. So the battle was quite even. But keep in mind, Naruto didn't whip out his Sage Mode, or even whip out most of his strongest jutsu, because Naruto's trying to shock the team later on when he ends up displaying abilities such as those. That said, though, what would end up happening is Sasuke would end up rushing into Kakashi, getting taken out, and eventually Sakura would be the only person who, you know, ends up getting the food. She would end up feeding Naruto and Sasuke both after you know, not actually hating Naruto this time. And eventually Kakashi would bust out of the bush being like, you pass, you know, going on to explain to them that, you know, those who abandon their comrades are scum, but those who abandon their those who break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. Yes, that exact line. And this would actually cause them all to be like, oh, you know, he's kind of right. Sasuke would still look at Naruto with this sort of like jealousy and just bitterness in his face because he wishes that Naruto's strength was his own, thinking that Naruto's so lucky because he got trained by the Toad Sage, and this time around Naruto doesn't actually have this understanding between Naruto and Sasuke that they had in the original. Both of them didn't both come from the same situation where Naruto never had family, he was hated, he felt the ostracization that Sasuke felt himself. This time Naruto was raised alongside Jiraiya, somebody who gave him the active care that Naruto would have needed to succeed in the ninja world that he found himself presently in. So Sasuke and Naruto never quite ended up kind of like clicking together per se, but it definitely did end up kind of leading to a different relationship that's going to happen within the story. What ends up happening from here is eventually we would cut to the 2 weeks worth of worthless D-rank missions, and eventually the mission with Tazuna would be announced. Now, I am just going to be skipping the Demon Brother portion just because nothing important to really take note of, and just to say one thing, Naruto's actually one of the people who ends up acting, while Sasuke simply holds off one of the Demon Brothers. Naruto's able to actively take them out easily. And eventually they continue walking when they spot a white bunnet, which Naruto ends up throwing a kunai at, to the shock of the team, with Sakura even telling Naruto that he's dumb for that. Why would he do that? Naruto would end up actively saying that that bunny should not be around at this time, and eventually a thick fog would envelop the area before Zabuza arrives, and the fight between Kakashi would happen much like it does in the canon events. Eventually, once Kakashi gets caught off guard and is put in the water prison, Naruto takes this opportunity as his moment to shine. Knowing that Zabuza is already actively probably in the same level as Kakashi with the Sharingan, he opts to actively activate Sage Mode and proceeds to essentially blitz at him while walking on the water, mind you, and go on to absolutely destroy Zabuza in a flurry of taijutsu attacks and jutsu attacks as well. He would end up shooting a massive amount of mud at Zabuza that ends up kind of drenching him and like causing him to fall into the water. Zabuza would quickly be able to jump out and would then cast a water dragon jutsu. Naruto, seeing this, would barely be able to dodge out of the way before using a water cyclone that is kind of like a barrier between him and the dragons that would come rushing in. He would be able to use these abilities in tandem with his Sage Mode abilities to then quickly blitz Zabuza and begin landing more and more blows onto him, eventually leading to the almost final blow on Zabuza, which would have promptly killed him before a Senbon would have came flying in from the direction which Haku threw from. Eventually, he would end up having to get into a taijutsu as well as very powerful battle against Haku before he would end up essentially whipping out the Ice Crystal Mirror Jutsu. Naruto would end up still being caught inside of it, but using his sensory abilities is able to actually dodge many of the Senbon that would come flying at him, even at the insane speeds that they were coming in. What Naruto would decide to do is to create a mud wall jutsu that's able to cover himself from these thick attacks. And what the mud wall would actually do is essentially make it so that chakra would begin being drained from anybody who was within the dome. And he created two, one to surround himself and protect himself, and another one to actively be able to absorb Haku's chakra from the outside. So he's basically surrounded by two of Naruto's attacks. Naruto would then go on to kind of use the transformation jutsu to turn himself into just like to harden his body and turn himself to that of an iron-like state. And eventually, once Haku's chakra begins to run a little lower, Naruto brings down the mud wall barrier before rushing in and actively hitting him with a gigantic blow to the face that cracks the mask and sends Haku flying to the ground, before then going on to land the final blow by using a kunai to just destroy Haku. Following this, we see the aftermath between Kakashi and Zabuza's battle after Zabuza was blatantly beaten by Naruto, and we just see Haku and Zabuza both dead. Naruto's training with Jiraiya made it so that he was way stronger and was actively able to help in this situation, which then leads to Kakashi not actually being half as drained as he would have been in the original. So after about 2 days of rest from the Sharingan overuse, he would have been able to train the team. They would just be having a normal day. Eventually, the day with Naruto oversleeping would happen, and he would end up saving Inari and Tsunami from the fate of the two random thugs that he would have faced in the original. Eventually arriving at the bridge, only to see that Gato and all of his men were disbanded by Sasuke and Kakashi, since Sakura simply stood there with a kunai, being useless per usual. If you made it this far into the video, comment #useless Sakura for me if you hate Sakura with your pure guts, and also like the video if you hate her. If you don't hate her, then subscribe to the channel. No, I'm totally kidding. But seriously though, do make sure to comment #Sakura is useless down below, because I hate her guts. Anyways though, what ends up happening following this is they end up going back to the Hidden Leaf Village. This time around, Naruto doesn't have the established connection with Konohamaru, so he never ends up trying to tease him and thus never ends up running into Kankuro, leading to the early altercation between Team 7 and the Sand siblings. That never happens. So essentially what ends up happening instead is they end up reporting to Hiruzen, getting their B rank mission payment, and from there being informed of Kakashi about the active state of the Chunin exams going down. From there, the day would arrive and Sasuke would still end up being challenged by Lee, which after he ends up getting a painful loss, Naruto was able to jump in there and actually rival Lee in terms of taijutsu, causing him to actually take off his weights and then go on to actually fight Naruto evenly. This would shock Sasuke, who was using not the Sharingan, mind you, since he doesn't end up unlocking it this time, but he was trying his absolute hardest to keep up with Lee. The beating that Sasuke received was even worse than the one that he gained in the original, so yeah, not good for him. And this is also going to lead to a couple of bad things for Sasuke, since this Sasuke doesn't end up having the fight against Haku and unlocking the Sharingan much later. This is going to halt his progression with the Sharingan, so Yeah. But what ends up essentially happening is Naruto goes on to kind of keep up with Lee until eventually the gigantic turtle thing would have arrived and stopped the battle before it could get too serious. They end up going to the exam proctor and they end up taking the written exam, which just consists of them trying to, just steal information and stuff like that. They end up passing just like they would in the original, and then they end up finding themselves in the forest of death, when inevitably they would end up being encountered by the legendary Sannin, Orochimaru. Once Naruto begins seeing the way that this man fights, the large chakra signal, and the way that he is just utterly dismantling them, Naruto's able to put two and two together and realize Orochimaru. He says this out loud and Orochimaru would lick his lips before saying, "You're a very smart kid, you know that?" Naruto would say, "Jiraiya told me all about you when I was journeying with him. He told me you were an S-rank shinobi that should not be messed with, and I always have wondered how I would fare against you." Naruto would actively go on to put Sakura down, who was already unconscious, and then proceed to close his eyes before opening them once more and tapping into Sage Mode, which would shock Orochimaru, who would be thinking that a kid, much less a genin, should not be having the ability to go into Sage Mode. He ends up getting his guard up and he ends up running in towards Naruto, who was able to do a decent job against fighting Orochimaru. I mean, keep in mind, Sage Mode was able to help Naruto keep up with the likes of Pain. So I think that a Genin Naruto who already has the know-how and knowledge of a Naruto who would have unlocked the Sage Mode in the original canon, with minus a little bit of the strength that Naruto would have gathered from more years of training and having an older body, would be about, say, 38% weaker than the Shippuden Naruto. So while he is able to, do a pretty decent job against Orochimaru, he still isn't able to defeat him, which would end up leading Naruto to feeling rage, and eventually the Kyuubi's chakra would end up pumping into him. However, we already saw what would happen if a four-tailed Naruto fought him, so the results would remain the same. Sasuke would still end up getting bit by the curse mark and get a hickey on his neck, and Naruto would still end up being unconscious after having the 5-seal prong seal performed on him via Orochimaru lighting up his fingers with blue light and then just sealing the nine tails way more than it already was. This will lead to Naruto being unconscious, and the events with Sasuke breaking the Sound Genin's arms would still go down just like they would have in canon. I mean, Sasuke, as soon as he woke up from the curse mark state, was still bloodlusted just like he would have been in the original, and nothing that's happened so far would lead me to believe otherwise. So that remains the same. Sasuke would still end up having his curse mark sealed, and the first stage of the preliminaries of the Chunin exams essentially ends up going like many of you guys would expect. It's nothing but a wash for Naruto, and the rest of the battles remain just like they would have in canon. Kiba versus Naruto. I'm sorry guys, I know probably a lot of you would enjoy hearing how badly Naruto whoops Kiba, but since Kiba doesn't even have the relationship that he would have with Naruto, he doesn't even act cocky, and he actively is aware of Naruto's strength, trying his best, but inevitably his best wasn't enough. This leads to the 1-month training period, with Kakashi going off to train Sasuke and actually helping him unlock his Sharingan. He would end up getting him to the 1 and 2 Tomoe state and have him actively try to copy his own taijutsu instead of actually copying Lee, since he doesn't unlock it this time. Matter of fact, I changed that. I changed my mind. Sasuke ends up unlocking his Sharingan, fighting against Orochimaru in the forest. That just sounds more likely. So yeah, never mind. He is able to copy Lee's techniques, but his Sharingan prowess is about a month back in terms of like where it should be. So he is like a bit weaker than the Sasuke that we get in the original, but that's not really going to be affecting things too much. One good thing that happens that would end up changing is Jiraiya's arrival to the village. See, this time Jiraiya isn't going to be teaching Naruto, hey, like, you should work on your summoning jutsu. You should try mastering, the Kyuubi. But instead, Jiraiya and Naruto hang out, seeing as it's been close to a couple of months since they've seen each other, and they're not quite used to that. I mean, they've kind of been like father and son, even though, Naruto has never quite said it yet, but he sees Jiraiya as his full-fledged father. I mean, yeah, his dad was his dad via genetics, but Jiraiya has been the man that's always been there, holding his hand whenever he fell, helping him out whenever the Nine-Tails chakra went wild, teaching Naruto how to be a man. Jiraiya was that person, and Naruto can't be any more thankful to him than ever. Jiraiya would look to Naruto, smile, and say, yeah, I have always been there for you, brat, but you know what you guys are gonna have to be in for? the sponsor of today's video, fandom. As anime fans, we love to show our support to our favorite shows by rocking anime apparel. But something I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is it's so expensive. So I've partnered up with Fandom to bring you all affordable, high quality anime merch that you are sure to love. And if you use my code ZETHER at checkout, you can even get an extra 10% off the already affordable merch. Keep in mind, it does come from overseas sellers, so its sizing is going to be different since it's overseas. That said, let's get back into the video. Naruto and Jiraiya, during this brief little 1 month training area, or more like they didn't see each other for the first 4 days of the month, so just minus 4 days to a month and get like 26 days, I guess. Yeah, 26 days. They have 26 days to train. The thing that Jiraiya would focus on mostly is actually going to be controlling the Nine Tails of Chakra, noting that he's actually going to be fighting against a Gentle Fist user, and the fact that he's going to be doing that, even though like Naruto does have a bunch of jutsus, the Hyuga is a close range fighter, so he's definitely going to have to work on his taijutsu speed and strength, and he's also going to have to be working on the Kyuubi, seeing as he might need it to rejam his chakra pads back open if the Hyuga is able to actually do something. Naruto works on this with Jiraiya, and also would end up being would even get a little bit of assistance from Jiraiya when it comes to seals and all that stuff. So that's essentially what Naruto would do for his 1 month training period, just having a lot more time to essentially bond with Jiraiya and actively be perverts at the what's it called, the saunas, or like the springs, if you could call it. Also, not only that, but Naruto would show off his sexy jutsu, which he would have developed during his time in the village, and made Jiraiya extremely proud. Yep, some things never change. That said though, cutting back into the Chunin exams, this is where things are slightly going to begin to change just a tad bit, so I'm not really going to be going into too much. The Naruto versus Neji fight is going to be changing, but what I do see changing mostly is essentially that the fact that in the original, Naruto was able to defeat Neji via the fact that he had the power of the Nine Tails, because if he didn't, Destiny would have definitely laid it out so that Naruto would have been the loser. This time around, Naruto did it on his own, using the 3 element styles he's already perfected, using his transformation style, substitution jutsus, cognitive reasoning that he would have used in the battle, and also his superior taijutsu skills to Neji. Keep in mind, while both of them have been training from an early age, Naruto has been training by one of the legendary Sanins, and I'm pretty sure it suffices to say that his skills are probably second to not a lot of people. So Naruto's able to, get away with that W, and eventually Sasuke arrives to fight against Gaara. These events end up kind of aligning more like they do in canon via Hiruzen's death, Naruto going off to help against the battle with Gaara. Once he arrives to actually save Sasuke from the battle, Naruto doesn't immediately jump into it and begin struggling, being like, I'm this, I'm that, being like, oh my god, like I will be Hokage. No, none of that stuff, or believe it, none of that. Essentially what Naruto ends up doing is jumping in there and actively beginning to use the jutsu that he has with himself, as well as knowing the fact that if he gets close to Gaara, he'll most likely die. Eventually, Gaara would get frustrated and allow Shukaku to actually take over, leading to Naruto activating Sage Mode and then summoning Gamabunta, leading to a very easy W, which Sasuke had to watch in utter horror, because he simply watched the Kage level battle come from the person that he believed was beneath him, the person that this entire time has been showing him up ever since his arrival at the village, and Sasuke, quite frankly, is beginning to get sick and tired of it. He's sick and tired of being second place to somebody, and Sasuke's god complex is just getting in the way a ton when it comes to his overall development and what's going on in the village. But Hiruzen's death still leads to the question of who's going to be next. Jiraiya would still be asked to become Kage, but I still don't think that would change. And eventually they end up going off to find Tsunade. This is where things kind of remain the same, in the sense that during this time Naruto works on learning the Rasengan just like you would expect. They end up running into Itachi and Kisame. Sorry to say this, but I don't care if Naruto has Sage Mode or any of the other jutsus. He's not exactly going to be able to engage in a one-on-one battle against Itachi, who uses his Sharingan and with a simple gaze could ruin this man's whole sleep schedule, or against Kisame, who just raw physical strength and chakra levels has the chakra levels of a tailed beast. Sorry to say it, but Naruto is not going to fare quite well. Things pretty much remain the same, and they do so until they end up getting to not Sasuke, but until they end up arriving at Tsunade's area, where they end up meeting her and bringing her back to the village. When it comes to the battle between Naruto and Kabuto, that's just a lot easier, and slamming a Rasengan into Kabuto helps out a lot. Naruto this time around was actually able to trick Tsunade into returning to the village via using the Rasengan that he had already mastered to kind of scapegoat her into thinking that, she had even a hope of a slither to make it back to the village. He ends up winning the necklace and getting a kiss from Tsunade after helping her get over her crippling weakness. Following this, they return to the village, and about 1 week into it, Sasuke wakes up and challenges Naruto to a one-on-one fight, telling him that he's not beneath him. He ends up getting washed without the usage of the Rasengan or Kakashi even jumping in the way, and he ends up ultimately deciding to run off with the Sound 4. This all leads to the eventual team up of all the Genin running after Sasuke, and every fight essentially goes down just like it does in canon. Obviously, Naruto was able to perform a lot better when it comes to the getting sealed by the fat guy, and also when it comes to the fight against Kimimaru, which he's actually able to hold himself against him a lot better than he would have in canon, but still would end up being saved by Lee as well as Gaara, ending up running into Sasuke, who at the Valley of the End would end up telling Naruto that he doesn't know what loneliness is like, that he's never, experienced the feelings that he has. And Naruto has to admit it. Yeah, he hasn't. This time around, he can't say that Sasuke's like a brother to him or say, I'll bring you back breaking all the bones in your body. The only reason Naruto's doing this, if anything, is because he was signed by the village. But eventually, he would end up beating Sasuke. I mean, he has Sage Mode, he has the Rasengan, and he also ends up getting the Amp from Kurama. There's no chance in hell Sasuke's going to be beating this version of Naruto. So, Sasuke gets taken back to the village forcefully, where he is essentially just told that until he can calm down with his Avenger thingy-majigger, he's just going to be stuck in this room, sealed off from everybody. Eventually, though, Kakashi would end up taking Sasuke under his wing and training him personally in the hopes that he could change and sway Sasuke's mind as to his current goals. Naruto still goes off for 3 years to train with Jiraiya, and what would end up happening this time around is a very cool situation in the sense that this time around, Naruto's able to actually master the Rasen Shuriken and also master the Flying Raijin during the 3 years that he's gone. Also getting a lot more powerful when it comes to his taijutsu speed and raw deductive reasoning skills. He becomes being way more OP earlier than he does in canon, and not only that, but Naruto also ends up gaining full access to KCM. I mean, this version of Naruto has an entire 3 years. I don't doubt that he could at least learn these things. The progression of Naruto's skill and strength is just ultimately going to be getting blown exponentially through the roof. So once he arrives back into the village, instead of Sasuke being off, forming Taka, killing Orochimaru, going off to do the bridge mission or anything like that, what ends up happening is essentially Sasuke goes off with Team 7 to go find Gaara. He's able to help them, actually kills Deidara early on this time, with Naruto sticking to help Sakura with the taking out of Sasori with the help of Lady Chiho. Gaara is still inevitably brought back, and from here events in the Naruto timeline only change in the sense that Sasuke is never there to kill Killer Bee, the Kage summon is never called, when Pain ends up attacking the village, he has the help of Sasuke to help him taking out a couple of the paths of pain, which granted is actually a massive change, but when you take into account that this only pretty much makes the battle easier, nothing else ends up changing. Sasuke still ends up going off to fight Itachi and still ends up being taken by Obito, which ends up essentially leading to... Actually, I had said previously that he would not end up capturing Killer Bee in Okage Summit, but I actually take that back because now that I realize it, Sasuke going off to fight Itachi would still lead to him being told by Obito this truth about Itachi, leading to the situation. Wait. Did it happen simultaneously? Did Pain fight against the village? How do I... Jesus, did the Pain attack happen before or after Sasuke's fight against Itachi? Ooh, this actually does lead us a very good dilemma. I'm going to be saying that it happened simultaneously. So the situation between Naruto and fighting the six paths of pain is only eased by the fact that he has the flying Raijin. That said, he uses these abilities in tandems with KCM1 to utterly outclass Pain and his six puppets. And Sasuke, being around Naruto for a couple of extra months, is actually a lot stronger than he was in canon. Also, one more good thing that came out of these changes is that Orochimaru in the bridge fight never ends up happening, but when it comes to the war and all this stuff and Naruto being, present for the Kage Summit and Danzo being there and Sasuke killing him, that stuff doesn't change. Jiraiya still ends up dying to Pain. He ends up having a horrible moment, and essentially accepting the fact that his sensei is gone was a lot harder than usual. So this time around, Naruto had an even harder time letting Pain go, but he ended up realizing that his sensei would not have wanted his students to just aimlessly kill each other. So that was the only thing that essentially stopped Naruto from utterly destroying Pain, much to the surprise of Nagato himself. The war state pretty much ends up going the same, with Naruto and Sasuke fighting each other at the Valley of the End at the end, and Kaguya would still end up being brought back to life. Yada yada yada. The things only end up changing in the sense that slight events end up changing. Sasuke stays in the village for a little longer before going off with the Akatsuki, not having Taka this time. So instead of him going off to capture Killer B, Obito went off with him. Events were a lot easier than they were in canon, and Naruto never had to deal with the hatred. What did you guys think of my take? I know it was a very fast-paced one at that, but I genuinely just wanted to get to the point and let you guys know that had Naruto gone off to train with Jiraiya, while yes, it would have made everything easier, it also would have made Naruto a less relatable character due to the fact that he would have had all the tools to actively succeed, instead of being the fun-loving Naruto Uzumaki who started from the ground up to get to where he was. What did you guys think? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you guys think that things would have happened differently? And also correct any mistakes that I might have made in the what if. If you do so, please don't be too rude about it. And also, recommend the video to a friend. Like the video and check out the channel artist down below in the link down below in the description. And with that being said, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Zether, and I am out. Peace.